For years, Ilhan Omar has been one of the most controversial figures in American politics. From her radical statements to accusations of anti-American rhetoric, she has been at the center of countless political firestorms. But now, things have taken a shocking turn, because after relentless pressure from lawmakers after years of heated debates, Congress has finally made its decision. Ilhan Omar is set to be deported to Somalia. And this isn't just political theater. This time, it's real. The vote has been cast, the papers have been filed, and unless something drastic happens, Omar could be forced out of the country she was elected to serve. But how did we get here? What led to this historic decision? And most importantly, is Ilhan Omar really about to be removed from the United States for good? Because while her political career may be crumbling behind the scenes, Omar and her allies are doing everything they can to stop this from happening. And the battle, it's far from over. Let's break it all down. Ilhan Omar's political career has never been free of controversy. From the moment she stepped into Congress in 2019, she became one of the most polarizing figures in Washington. At first, she was celebrated by progressives as a groundbreaking voice, a Somali-born refugee who had risen to power in the U.S. government. But to many Americans, Omar quickly became known for all the wrong reasons. It started with her inflammatory statements, accusations of anti-Semitism, comments that many saw as hostile toward the U.S., and even remarks that seemed to downplay the 9/11 attacks. Some people did something. Those 4 words, her description of one of the deadliest attacks on American soil, sent shockwaves through the country. Critics immediately slammed her, calling it disrespectful, unpatriotic, and even dangerous. But that was just the beginning. Omar became a key member of the Squad, a group of far-left Democrats known for their radical policies, anti-police rhetoric, and attacks on Israel. And over the years, the controversies only escalated. Allegations of campaign finance violations, accusations of immigration fraud involving her previous marriages, public feuds with Jewish leaders, law enforcement, and even members of her own party. Each time, she denied wrongdoing. Each time, her allies defended her. But the outrage kept growing. Republicans demanded investigations, conservative media called for her removal, and even some Democrats distanced themselves. But no matter how much backlash she faced, Ilhan Omar stayed in power. Until now. Because what just happened is unlike anything before. Congress didn't just criticize her. They didn't just launch another investigation. This time they made a decision that could permanently remove Ilhan Omar from the United States. And the political battle is only getting started, because what happens next changes everything. For years, calls to remove Ilhan Omar from Congress were dismissed as nothing more than political noise. Her critics, mainly conservatives, accused her of anti-American rhetoric, corruption, and ties to radical ideologies. But despite the backlash, nothing ever stuck. Every time Republicans demanded investigations, Democrats shielded her. Every time someone questioned her past, the media brushed it off. But that all changed in recent months. Because behind the scenes, powerful forces had been building a case against her. And when new allegations surfaced, the pressure became impossible to ignore. Leaked documents suggested irregularities in her immigration history. Campaign finance watchdogs uncovered questionable transactions in her donations. A resurfaced interview exposed even more controversial remarks about America. It was no longer just political attacks, it was evidence. And that's when the movement to remove Ilhan Omar picked up serious momentum. Conservative lawmakers demanded that her past be fully investigated. Republican leaders called for immediate legal action. And then, the unthinkable happened. For the first time, even some Democrats started to distance themselves. Whispers in Washington suggested that Omar had become a liability, a scandal too big to defend. Some feared that defending her would cost them key elections in battleground states. And that's when the conversation changed. Because suddenly it wasn't just about removing Ilhan Omar from Congress, it was about removing her from the country altogether. The argument? If Omar had violated immigration laws, if she had committed fraud to gain U.S. citizenship, then Congress had every right to strip her of it. And if that happened, she wouldn't just be removed from office, she would be deported. At first, many dismissed it as impossible, but then legal experts stepped in, and what they said changed everything, because legally speaking, it might actually be possible, and that's when Congress took action. because what happened next shocked the entire country. For years, Ilhan Omar's critics had demanded action. They called her unfit for office. They accused her of breaking the law, abusing her position, and even committing immigration fraud. But nothing ever came of it. She survived every scandal, every investigation, and every attempt to remove her from Congress. Until now. Because what just happened? No one saw coming. Congress has officially voted to move forward with Ilhan Omar's deportation. And this time, it's not just political theater, it's real. A formal resolution was introduced calling for an investigation into her citizenship status and whether she illegally obtained U.S. residency. The language of the resolution was clear. If the allegations against her were true, her citizenship could be revoked. And if that happened, she would have no legal right to remain in the U.S. The vote was heated. On one side, Republican lawmakers demanding immediate action. On the other, Democrats calling it a political witch hunt. Debates lasted for hours. Tensions in the chamber were at an all-time high. Some lawmakers refused to even speak on the matter, fearing backlash from their own party. Others took the floor and delivered fiery speeches arguing that this was about law, not politics. And when the votes were finally cast, the result sent shockwaves through Washington. A majority of Congress had voted in favor of moving forward with the investigation. This wasn't just symbolic, this was the first step toward revoking Ilhan Omar's citizenship. And for the first time since taking office, she wasn't just fighting for her career. She was fighting to stay in the country. The moment the decision was announced, Washington erupted. Liberal media called it unprecedented. Conservative media called it long overdue. And Ilhan Omar? She went into full panic mode. Because this wasn't just a political attack, this was a legal battle that could determine her future. And the fight was only just beginning. Because what happened next? No one expected. The moment Congress announced its decision, the political world exploded. Ilhan Omar wasn't just facing criticism anymore. She was facing the real possibility of losing her U.S. citizenship and being deported. And her reaction? Pure panic. Within hours of the vote, her office released an emergency statement. She called the decision a racist, politically motivated attack and accused her opponents of weaponizing the government to silence minorities. She didn't address the allegations against her. She didn't deny the claims about her past. Instead, she went on the offensive. She blasted Republicans, accusing them of trying to erase democracy. She called out moderate Democrats for not defending her strongly enough. She even attacked the media, claiming they had allowed the far right to control the narrative. But behind the scenes, her team was scrambling. Advisors held emergency meetings to figure out their next move. Legal teams were called in to explore options. Could she fight this in court? Could the Biden administration step in and protect her? Could she appeal the decision to the Supreme Court? And the biggest question of all, was there any way to stop the process before it was too late? Meanwhile, on Capitol Hill, things were getting even worse for Omar. Journalists flooded the halls of Congress, shoving microphones in the faces of lawmakers. Do you support Ilhan Omar's deportation? Is this setting a dangerous precedent? Do you believe she broke the law? Democrats were deeply divided. Some rushed to defend her, calling the move outrageous and claiming it would backfire on Republicans. Others, they stayed silent, and that silence spoke volumes. Even members of her own party weren't willing to risk their careers by standing too close to her. Meanwhile, Republicans doubled down. They went on news networks, social media, and press conferences declaring this a victory for the rule of law. No one is above the law, one lawmaker said. If Ilhan Omar broke immigration laws, she should be treated the same as anyone else. The media erupted into full-blown chaos. Conservative outlets celebrated the decision, calling it long overdue. Liberal media framed it as a dangerous new precedent. But one thing was clear. Ilhan Omar's future in America was now uncertain. And as she fought to save her career and her citizenship behind the scenes, a massive legal battle was about to begin. Because what she did next? No one saw coming. The decision to move forward with Ilhan Omar's potential deportation sent shockwaves through Washington and the entire country. But now, the biggest question remains. Is deportation actually possible? Can a sitting member of Congress really be stripped of their citizenship and forced to leave the U.S.? Legal experts and political analysts immediately weighed in. And what they said changed everything. Because as it turns out, There is a legal path to revoking Ilhan Omar's U.S. citizenship, and it all comes down to one critical factor: how she obtained it in the first place. Under U.S. immigration law, citizenship can be revoked if it was obtained fraudulently. If Ilhan Omar lied on her immigration application, concealed critical information, or committed fraud to gain her status, her citizenship can be legally stripped away. And if that happens, she would no longer have legal protection to stay in the country. Her critics have long claimed that there are serious discrepancies in her background. Allegations of marriage fraud, including reports that she may have married her brother for immigration purposes, campaign finance violations tied to foreign donations, unanswered questions about her immigration documents. Omar has denied all accusations. But now, Congress is demanding a full investigation. And if the evidence proves that she committed fraud to gain U.S. residency, her citizenship could be revoked, which means deportation would no longer be a political question. It would be a legal requirement. Immediately after the decision was announced, Democrats scrambled to figure out if they could block it. Could President Biden step in and protect her? The answer? Maybe. As president, Biden does have the power to intervene in certain immigration cases. He could use executive authority to delay the process, or even grant a special status to protect Omar from removal. But if Congress has concrete legal grounds to strip her citizenship, even Biden's power would be limited. And if the Supreme Court upholds the decision, there would be nothing he could do to stop it. With her political career in jeopardy and the threat of deportation looming, Omar's legal team is already preparing for the fight of her life. If Congress moves forward, Omar's lawyers will almost certainly take the case to the Supreme Court. The argument? That the move to deport her is politically motivated and violates her constitutional rights. Legal scholars are split on what could happen next. Some say the case could drag on for years in legal battles, delaying any actual removal. Others say the evidence against her could be overwhelming, forcing the courts to uphold the decision. One thing is certain: this fight isn't over yet. If Ilhan Omar loses her citizenship and is deported, the political impact would be unprecedented. A sitting U.S. lawmaker removed from Congress and expelled from the country. A massive political firestorm that could reshape future immigration laws. A new standard set for politicians facing serious allegations. And most importantly, a signal that no one is untouchable. For her supporters, it would be a dark moment in American history. For her critics, it would be justice finally served. But for Ilhan Omar, this is a nightmare scenario that she is fighting to stop, because the next few weeks will determine everything. And as the legal war begins, the question remains: can she survive this, or is her time in America officially running out? The decision to move forward with Ilhan Omar's potential deportation has sent shockwaves through the entire political landscape. For years, she has been one of the most controversial figures in Congress, praised by progressives, condemned by conservatives, and often at the center of heated debates over immigration, foreign policy, and national identity. But now, her political fate is no longer just a talking point. It is a defining moment in American history. Because if Ilhan Omar is actually removed from the country, it would set a precedent unlike anything seen before. Lawmakers, media analysts, and legal experts are already debating the long-term consequences. And the question on everyone's mind is simple: what happens next? Many in Washington fear that this case could change how immigration laws are enforced against politicians and public figures. Does this mean that any lawmaker with a questionable immigration history could face the same fate? Could this open the door for future deportation battles involving high-profile figures? And most importantly, does this shift the balance of power in Congress itself? For Republicans, this is being framed as a massive victory. They argue that no one is above the law, and if Omar obtained her citizenship fraudulently, then she should face the same consequences as any other individual. They are using this moment to push for stricter immigration laws, stronger enforcement, and a crackdown on potential fraud. Many conservative voices are calling for similar investigations into other politicians who were born outside the United States. They see this as just the beginning. But for Democrats, the reaction has been very different. They see this as a dangerous political move, one that could set a precedent for targeting lawmakers based on ideology rather than legal violations. Many argue that Ilhan Omar is being singled out because of her race, religion, and outspoken views, rather than actual legal misconduct. They warn that if Congress can move forward with deporting a sitting lawmaker, then political retaliation could become the new norm. Some Democrats are already calling for investigations into conservative figures, arguing that if Omar's background can be scrutinized, then others should be as well. This battle is no longer just about Ilhan Omar. It has become a larger war over the future of U.S. politics, and the country is more divided than ever. Meanwhile, outside of Washington, the American public is reacting in real time. Protests have already erupted in major cities, with Omar's supporters claiming this is an attack on democracy and an example of racial and religious discrimination. But on the other side, conservatives are celebrating, saying, "This proves that the law applies to everyone, even politicians." Social media is in full meltdown mode. The hashtags #DeportOmar and #StandWithIlhan are trending side by side, with Americans fiercely debating whether this is justice or an abuse of power. News outlets are running non-stop coverage, each spinning the story in their own way. Conservative networks are declaring this a landmark decision that exposes corruption in Congress. Liberal media is warning that this is a dangerous shift in American politics, one that could lead to the suppression of political opponents in the future. One thing is clear: this isn't just about one person anymore. This is about the direction of the country. And as the legal battle continues, as protests grow louder, and as Congress braces for what comes next, one question looms over everything. Is this just the beginning of a new political era? Or is Ilhan Omar just the first of many lawmakers who could face this fate? The moment news broke that Ilhan Omar could be deported, the entire country erupted in chaos. For some, this was a long overdue moment of justice. For others, it was a political nightmare. And for millions of Americans, it raised one massive question: has politics gone too far? Within hours of Congress announcing its decision, protests exploded across the country. In major cities like New York, Washington, D.C., and Minneapolis, Omar's supporters flooded the streets, chanting, holding signs, and demanding that the Biden administration step in to stop her deportation. For her base, this wasn't just about one congresswoman. This was an attack on democracy itself. "If they can do this to Ilhan Omar, who's next?" one protester shouted into a megaphone outside the Capitol. Activist groups immediately jumped in, calling this a dangerous new precedent that could lead to politicians being targeted for their views rather than their actions. Civil rights organizations issued emergency statements condemning the move, arguing that Omar's removal was rooted in racism and Islamophobia. The Council on American Islamic Relations called it a blatant attack on one of the first Muslim women in Congress and vowed to fight it at every level. Social justice groups held emergency press conferences, warning that this would not stop with Ilhan Omar. If you can strip someone's citizenship for political reasons, that's the beginning of a much darker path, one activist warned. And inside Washington, Democrats were in full-blown crisis mode. Progressive lawmakers rushed to Omar's defense, calling the decision a disgraceful abuse of power. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez posted a fiery response on Twitter, calling it one of the most dangerous and authoritarian moves in modern American history. Bernie Sanders held an emergency speech on the Senate floor, warning that this was a direct assault on free speech. Other Democratic leaders issued urgent calls to President Biden, demanding that he intervene immediately to prevent Omar from being removed from the U.S. But the White House? They remained shockingly silent. Reporters bombarded Biden's press secretary with questions. Will President Biden stop Ilhan Omar's deportation? Does the administration believe this is a legal process or a political attack? Will Omar's removal affect Democratic support in 2024? And yet, no clear answer was given. Inside the White House, sources leaked that top officials were divided. Some believed that defending Omar would be political suicide, a fight that would only hurt Democrats in upcoming elections. Others saw it as a moral obligation, a stand that had to be taken, no matter the consequences. But outside of Washington, the reaction was completely different, because conservatives weren't just watching, they were celebrating. They saw this as proof that no one is above the law. They flooded social media with clips of Omar's most controversial remarks, using her own words against her. They called this a long overdue reckoning, a sign that justice was finally being served. Republican leaders took to the airwaves, framing this as a massive victory for the rule of law. If Ilhan Omar committed fraud to gain U.S. citizenship, why should she get special treatment? One conservative senator said during a press conference. No one is above the law, not even members of Congress. And online, social media erupted into a war zone. Within minutes, Twitter was flooded with competing hashtags as the country split into two sides. Hashtag DEPORT Omar skyrocketed to the top of Twitter's trending list, with thousands of conservatives demanding that her removal happen immediately. Hashtag Stand with Ilhan quickly followed, with progressives calling on Biden to step in and block the decision. Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube became battlegrounds for reaction videos, political debates, and live streams from the protests. Conservative influencers called it a major victory for accountability. Liberal commentators warned of a dangerous new political era, but amid all the online warfare, one thing became clear. This wasn't just a legal battle anymore. This was a national war over what America should stand for, and even mainstream news outlets struggled to keep up. Conservative media outlets celebrated the decision, calling it a moment of true justice. One Fox News anchor declared, "The system is finally working. No more protected elites. If you break the law, you face the consequences." Meanwhile, liberal media framed it as an assault on democracy. One CNN analyst warned, if Congress can strip citizenship from a sitting lawmaker, what's stopping them from doing it to anyone they disagree with? The uncertainty only fueled more outrage, because right now Ilhan Omar is still in the United States. Her legal team is preparing for the fight of her life. Her allies are pressuring the White House to take action. And inside Congress, lawmakers on both sides are bracing for impact because the backlash is growing. The protests are intensifying, and the country is more divided than ever. But in the middle of it all, one question remains. Will Omar actually be deported? Or is this about to turn into the biggest political fight of the decade? With the entire country watching her every move, Ilhan Omar isn't backing down. Despite Congress moving forward with an unprecedented decision, despite the massive public backlash, and despite the looming threat of deportation, she still has one last fight left. Because while her opponents are celebrating what they call a historic victory, Omar and her legal team are already working on a strategy, one that could stop this process in its tracks. The question is, does she actually have a chance? And if so, how can she stop her own removal from the United States? Omar's legal team is focusing on three main strategies, each one aimed at blocking or delaying the process long enough for a possible reversal. The first and most immediate move is a direct legal challenge, arguing that her deportation is unconstitutional and politically motivated. Her lawyers have already begun filing motions in federal court, seeking an emergency order to prevent her removal while the case is under review. They are claiming that Congress is overstepping its authority, using deportation as a political weapon to silence a dissenting voice in government. Legal scholars are divided on whether this argument would hold up. Some say that Congress has every right to revoke citizenship if fraud is proven. Others argue that this is a legal gray area, and the courts might be hesitant to strip an elected official of their status. Omar's lawyers are expected to take the case all the way to the Supreme Court, hoping that a ruling in her favor could block the deportation indefinitely. But even that might not be enough, because even if the courts decide to hear the case, it could drag on for months or even years, and with Congress already moving forward, she may not have that kind of time. Meanwhile, her political allies are applying pressure in Washington, demanding that the Biden administration take action. Progressive lawmakers, civil rights groups, and activists are calling for an immediate executive order that would protect Omar from removal. The pressure on President Biden is growing by the day, but so far the White House has remained silent. Reporters have repeatedly asked Biden's press secretary for a response, but each time they refuse to take a firm stance. Privately, sources inside the administration reveal that there is deep division on how to handle the situation. Some within Biden's inner circle believe that protecting Omar could be politically disastrous, potentially costing Democrats key races in the upcoming elections. Others argue that if Biden does nothing, it will be seen as a betrayal of the progressive base, one that could spark even more outrage among young and minority voters. But if Biden were to step in and block the deportation, It could trigger a constitutional battle between the executive branch and Congress. Some legal experts believe that Biden could use presidential authority to issue a special pardon-like protection, granting Omar temporary status and halting the deportation. But if he does, Republicans are expected to challenge it in court immediately. They could argue that the president does not have the power to override Congress in matters of citizenship revocation, setting up a battle that could shake the legal foundations of American politics. For now, Biden is stuck in a no-win situation, forced to choose between angering his base or giving his political opponents an easy victory. And Omar's fate hangs in the balance. If her legal challenges fail, and if Biden refuses to step in, there is still one final option. She could leave the U.S. voluntarily. Some political analysts believe Omar might seek asylum in another country before deportation can happen. If she chooses this route, she could position herself as a political exile, claiming that she was forced out of the U.S. for her beliefs. Progressive leaders in Europe, Canada, and the Middle East have already expressed outrage over her possible deportation. Some nations might even offer her asylum as a way to challenge the U.S. decision. If Omar flees the country before the process is complete, it could put the U.S. government in an awkward position. Would they still move forward with stripping her citizenship? Would they pursue diplomatic efforts to bring her back? Or would they quietly let her go, hoping the controversy fades away? While the legal battle intensifies, Omar is also facing another serious problem. Her own party is divided. While progressives are loudly defending her, many moderate Democrats are avoiding the issue. Some are refusing to comment when asked about her deportation. Others have remained silent altogether, fearing that taking a strong stance could cost them re-election. And the worst part? There are whispers that some Democrats actually support her removal, but are too afraid to say it publicly. For years, Omar has been one of the most controversial figures within her own party, often clashing with more moderate Democrats over foreign policy, policing, and economic issues. Some insiders believe that many Democrats secretly see her departure as an opportunity to shift the party back toward a more centrist platform. If Omar starts losing support within her own party, her chances of surviving this fight become even slimmer. At this moment, her future is hanging by a thread. Her legal team is racing against time to challenge the decision. The White House is facing pressure to act, but the political risks could be too great. Her allies are protesting, but her critics are winning the legal battle. And with every passing day, her chances of stopping this process are getting smaller. Because if Congress pushes forward, and if the Supreme Court upholds the ruling, there will be nothing left for her to do. Her time in Washington may be over, and soon she may be forced to leave the country she once represented. The fight isn't over yet, but at this rate, Ilhan Omar may have already lost. Ilhan Omar's fight is far from over. But no matter how this battle ends, one thing is clear: this is no longer just about her. This decision has sent shockwaves through American politics, setting a precedent that could change the game forever. Because if Congress can move forward with stripping a sitting lawmaker of their citizenship and deporting them, then the question becomes, who's next? For years, the idea of a U.S. politician being forcibly removed from office and expelled from the country seemed unthinkable. But now it's happening, and this decision isn't just about Ilhan Omar's fate. It's about whether this moment will reshape the future of U.S. politics forever. Already, political analysts are warning that this case could open the floodgates for similar moves against other politicians. Because if Ilhan Omar can be investigated, stripped of citizenship, and deported based on accusations of immigration fraud, then what stops Congress from doing the same to others? Some conservatives are already calling for more investigations, demanding that Congress take a closer look at the immigration records of other lawmakers who were born outside the United States. Some Republican leaders have hinted that this is just the beginning, that more politicians could soon be under scrutiny. And while Democrats are fighting back, many are terrified of what this means for the future. Because once a precedent like this is set, it's almost impossible to undo. Even some moderate Democrats are beginning to worry. If the power to strip citizenship and deport politicians becomes a new weapon in American politics, how long before it's used against someone on their side? Legal experts are also raising serious concerns about what this means for the broader legal system. Could this lead to a new era of political purges, where politicians use citizenship laws to remove their rivals? Could this spark a dangerous cycle of retaliation, where each new Congress finds ways to target and remove members of the opposing party? And what happens if this expands beyond politicians? If the government can revoke citizenship from a sitting congresswoman, what's stopping them from using the same process against other high-profile figures? What about journalists, activists, business leaders? Once this door is opened, there's no telling where it will lead. Meanwhile, the media war is only intensifying. Conservative outlets are calling this a long overdue victory for the rule of law, while liberal media is warning that this is the beginning of something far more dangerous. Some outlets are already comparing this to historical political purges, where governments have used legal technicalities to silence opposition voices. And around the country, Americans are becoming even more divided. Millions are outraged, believing that this decision is about political power, not justice. Millions more are cheering, saying that if someone commits fraud, they shouldn't be able to hide behind their political position. And the real question? Where does this all end? Because at this moment, Ilhan Omar is still in the United States. Her lawyers are still fighting in the courts. Her allies are still protesting, demanding intervention from the Biden administration. And her opponents, they are pushing even harder, demanding that Congress follow through with her removal as soon as possible. This isn't just about Ilhan Omar anymore. This is about the future of American politics. Will this be a one-time event, or is this the start of a much bigger movement? Is this truly about justice and accountability, or is it about power and control? And as the legal battles rage on, as protests flood the streets, and as politicians brace for what's next, one thing is certain: America will never be the same after this. Because what comes next could determine the future of U.S. democracy itself. If Ilhan Omar is ultimately forced to leave the country, it would send a chilling message to every foreign-born lawmaker, activist, and high-profile figure in America. It would prove that a simple accusation, if backed by enough political will, could erase someone's citizenship entirely. And if she somehow manages to fight back and stay, it could embolden her supporters and fuel an even greater divide between conservatives and progressives. This fight has already shattered the fragile political landscape in Washington. But beyond the walls of Congress, Americans are being forced to pick a side, because this case isn't just about the law anymore. It's about what kind of country America is becoming. Will the United States become a place where politicians can be forcibly removed by their opponents? Or will this backfire, setting off a chain reaction of investigations, deportations, and never-ending political warfare? If Congress is successful in removing Ilhan Omar, it will prove that even the most powerful people in Washington are not immune from consequences. But if she survives this, it could turn her into a progressive icon, a symbol of political persecution, and a rallying cry for millions who feel the system is being weaponized against dissenting voices. And in that case, this entire ordeal may not be a loss for Omar at all. It could be the beginning of something far bigger. Because no matter how this ends, one truth remains: America has entered a new era of politics. And once this battle is over, the country will never go back to the way it was before.